And welcome to Car Con Carne. I'm James Van Osdell. Quick reminder, the Chicago Reader, the venerable Chicago Reader, the long-running free weekly in Chicago, the place where we all learned about which shows were coming where in Chicago for so long. Their Best of Chicago 2020 poll is happening right now, and you can vote for a wide swath of categories. Awesome stuff, too. Car Con Carne is up for Best Music Podcast. You can find that in the Music and Nightlife section. And me, I'm up for Best Podcast Host in City Life. Chicago Reader's Best of Chicago 2020 poll, I believe voting lasts for another week or so. Tonight on Car Con Carne, it is all about punk rock history. It is all about Lookout Records. Grant Lawrence is my guest. He is from the band The Smugglers, and he is hosting the Lookout Zoomout live streaming series, which kicks off Sunday at 2 p.m. Central. Good evening, Grant. Hello. You're in Vancouver.
Hello, James. How are you? Thanks for having me on this show. Congratulations on your nomination. Is that
Thank
like
you.
something we vote on, or
Yeah.
what? Yeah. Okay. So now you're spreading that all over North America,
That's right.
world.
Going to the West Coast, going up north. Yeah.
Right. Well, thanks a lot for having me on your car show that is now from your house.
Right. And it's also a food show that involves no food.
Right. So there's no food, there's no car, but there's still rock and roll.
That's right. It's just a pack of lies is really what I'm trying to tell you, Grant. This is just a foundation of horseshit. That's all this is.
COVID has thrown your branding into the tumble cycle, basically.
This is a branding test. Can the brand survive this radical of a departure?
Yeah, I don't know. We'll have to see. I mean, there's no car, there's no food, there's just us. So we'll see.
There's just some punk rock legacy happening tonight.
Yes.
Lookout Records. I guess we can start there to provide context. Lookout Records to me was just one of those definitive punk labels, late 80s through the 90s and the early aughts. They brought so many bands to the world's attention. I mean, they introduced the world to Green Day. They introduced Operation Ivy and Mr. T Experience, Pansy Division, the Queers. They had the Donnas on their label. From a Chicago perspective, which is where we are right now, Gaza Strippers, Sludgeworth, Troubled Hubble, The Reputation, Screeching Weasel, the Riverdales, the Vindictives, even in Blackouts. Not a bad roster. And of course, from Canada, the Smugglers were on the label. Why Lookout? Why or explain the meaning of Lookout Records?
Well, why Lookout is because it was a dream come true to be an independent band in the 1990s and be on Lookout Records. I mean, in my opinion, it was better than being on any major label, that's for sure. Lookout Records, for my start, I was a kid, late 80s, early 90s, and I was like any kid who was getting into punk rock and alternative music. I would go downtown from my suburb and on the bus, and I would go to the record stores, and I would leaf through the record bins. And back then, it wasn't so much the band you trusted, it was the label. The label was the trademark of quality. So, of course, Sub Pop Records, starting right around that time as well in the late 80s, you knew if you saw that iconic Sub Pop brand, okay, it's probably going to be heavy, it's probably going to be pretty grungy. If you're into that kind of thing, it was a pretty good bet. And for Lookout, if you were into melodic pop punk, kind of Ramones, bubblecore, that kind of sound, it was absolute heaven. And so what I started doing was I started basically buying any record that had that iconic Lookout logo on the back with the two eyes looking up and the exclamation mark, one of the most famous logos in punk rock history. And it drew me in. And so I had a band that was signed to a great Seattle label called Pop Llama, the other pop in the Seattle scene, the much smaller Pop Llama label that had been around longer than Sub Pop, infamous, let's say, for bands like the Young Fresh Fellows and the Fastbacks, and later on they hit it big with the presidents of the United States of America. But so we were on that label, but the bands on that label were kind of older than us. We felt like the kids on that label, and we just loved Lookout Records. And we were on a tour down the West Coast one time in the early 90s, and we were playing with a very, very like-minded band called the Ne'er-Do-Wells, who morphed into the High Fives. They wore suits like the Smugglers. And we were with another Canadian band called Cub, and we met Larry Livermore, the infamous Svengali of Lookout, the Malcolm McLaren of the West Coast, the man with the golden ears. Because Lookout wasn't just a label. I mean, Lookout really popularized the genre of pop punk to the entire world. Larry Livermore did what so many people do. So many of these scene leaders from around the world, they recognize that something is going on in their scene that deserves to be documented, that deserves permanence. And you see this with great record labels all over the world. You saw it with Motown in Detroit. You saw it with Stiff Records in London, Sub Pop in Seattle, and in Berkeley, the East Bay, with the burgeoning punk scene in the late 80s and early 90s. It was Larry saying, and David Hayes, his partner, we have to put this on record. And they found success really early with Operation Ivy, the Mr. T Experience, who kind of wrote the blueprint for the modern day.
They're kind of the Rosetta Stone, aren't they?
They are. The Mr. T Experience don't really get enough credit. Dr. Frank and those guys, they really kind of created the blueprint of these sardonic, what we know of as pop punk today, with the chords and the attitude and the melody. And it was Green Day who kind of was going to Gilman Street and was seeing bands like Op Ivy and the Mr. T Experience, and they kind of blended. They didn't do the ska, but they blended it into an almost simplified and arguably more powerful power trio version of it, and took over the world. But so the Smugglers, it all started through community, and it all started through friendship. And Larry he's still a friend to this day. And we met him in around, I'd say, 93, 94.
So this is like Lookout Records ascended. This is peak Lookout.
But Larry wasn't hanging out, at Madison Square Garden with Green Day. He was hanging out at the entry level of the scene. He was hanging out at the all ages shows, and he was hanging out at Gilman, and he was going on tour with bands like the Queers. And so when these bands started coming through Vancouver, the Smugglers would play with them, and we got to be better and better friends. And the High Fives were very instrumental in bringing the Smugglers on board, and Cub came along too, the other Canadians signing to Lookout Records. And for a series of years in the 90s, the kind of middle chunk of the 90s there, it was like a kind of golden era of rock and roll. It was just an unbelievable community, an unbelievable family of bands. And it's something that it was one of the greatest times of my life that I treasure very much. I don't really care about the record sales or anything like that, because all that fades. But it was our highest point of record sales. But it was the fans and the community and the friends and the bands that came out of Lookout Records that was the most special thing about it.
And you said it. I mean, community is what I think of when I think of indie labels, when I think of punk rock. And just to draw further comparisons to labels like Lookout that kind of built those communities, identified a scene to go all in on. Here in Chicago, Wax Trax, very similar, started by two guys, blew up the industrial scene, just bringing that genre to the rest of the world.
Right.
And as far as labels where you bought anything they put out because you trusted them, there was that curation you just knew was going to be spot on. I mean, here in Chicago we had Touch and Go, which played big on a national level. And what I liked about Touch and Go, and I'm wondering if Lookout was the same, everything was a handshake deal. It wasn't these scary Satan contracts where you sign your life away and you don't actually make any money. It was just like, hey, we'll do right by you, you do right by us, we're good, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there were a lot of handshake deals at Lookout, and Larry, it was all about community, it was all about friendship. But I believe if I recall correctly, that the Lookout deal was 60-40. So the artist took 60 and the label took 40%. And that pretty much existed for years and years and years. And it worked. And everybody was relatively happy with that until the wheels started to fall off in the
Late
20, yeah, not late 90s. It was good until around the early 2000s, I would say.
When did Larry leave?
Larry left in 1997, and it was a major shock. I couldn't believe it. You know, he was our champion. I mean, we had really good friends at that label. The label manager, Molly Newman, one of the founders of the Riot Girl movement, ended up there. We knew her from the Olympia days in the early 90s. So it was thrilling that she ended up there. She went to Evergreen and Olympia, which is where we met her with her band Bratmobile. And Kathy Bauer, a punk from St. Louis, Missouri, came out, and she was working at the label. You know, she put on the one tour that Operation Ivy did of the United States. She put on the St. Louis show. So she's got major cred.
Totally.
And then Taggy Lee worked at Lookout. She's the daughter of Long Gone John, the incredible guy who runs Sympathy for the Record Industry. So there was all these amazing characters from the scene who just worked there. And then there was all the bands. And so we felt totally right at home. But then Larry left, and I couldn't believe it. Like, you know, 96 was a banner year. I mean, here's four records that came out in 96. So,
oh God,
there's Love Is Dead by the Mr. T Experience, their highest selling album.
I was going to say, and that's their high watermark, period.
Yeah. And then when the Queers went full bubblegum Beach Boys on Don't Back Down, again, 96, often considered their best album. Mm-hmm. And then there's Pansy Division, Wish I'd Taken Pictures, often considered their best album. And then there was the one record that Cub released on Lookout, and that was Box of Hair, and that was also 1996. So there was all, as you say, these high watermark albums that were coming out one after the other after the other. The Groovy Ghoulies had just been signed, and they just they released World Contact Day in 1996, and they hit the ground running with Lookout. They were just ready to go, and they toured like maniacs. But then Larry, I remember we were on tour at the Smugglers somewhere, and I called the label and I needed some records. And I also wanted to ask Larry for some advice because he had an open door policy and he was always available for advice. And he's a very, very smart guy when it comes to strategizing and anything to do with the bands. And he just comes by it naturally. And I said, hey, is Larry there? And they said, no, he's not here. And there was a sense of almost like a little bit of permanence in the person's voice who told me. And I said, well, where is he? When's he coming back? And the person said, he's not coming back. I'm like, what do you mean? He's gone for the day? No, he's gone forever. I'm like, what, did he die? No, he's left. He's left the company. And this is all, I was on some roadside payphone in Kansas or something like that. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He's gone. Like, what? He's the captain of the ship. He's the president of the label. What are you talking about? And so that was it. Larry left in 1997 to the shock of many. And, there's many a rumor about whatever his payout might have been because the stock was not quite at an all-time high, but pretty high. And but I guess he just thought, well, it was about 10 years for him, and he thought, oh, I've done everything that I can do. And he thought he was leaving something that was in very good shape, I think, in my opinion, in the hands of Chris Applegren, who had been long his protege, helper, assistant, manager, artist. I mean, Chris Applegren's done some of the most iconic Lookout record covers, including Kerplunk by Green Day. So it was essentially the torch was handed to Chris. But Chris was a very young guy, and he's a friend of mine. Both Larry and Chris are friends of mine to this day. But Chris was really young and suddenly had this like multi-million-dollar company. Just boom, here you go.
Yeah.
go for it. And Larry was in, his 50s or whatever, and had a savviness to him, and just a general high intelligence. And Chris is a genius too, but I would, in my opinion, say he's much more of an artistic genius, not exactly your business mogul.
Mm-hmm.
But all of a sudden, he had it all on his lap, and he had the Green Day back catalog and the Screeching Weasel catalog and the Queers, and the Donnas were just newly signed. So the Donnas actually kind of almost missed the Larry era completely. The Donnas were the first band to come along where they're like, because the jury was kind of out, like, will Lookout Records survive without Larry Livermore? And they answered that question with signing the Donnas, and the Donnas exploded.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Big time, like American Teenage Rock and Roll Machine, and then the next one, Get Skin Tight, with the pink cover, and the Donnas Turn 21. Like, all those sold stratospheric numbers, surpassing Screeching Weasel and the Queers, or at least in that same realm of hundreds of thousands of records. So that was a great sign, I mean, that was awesome. And then, but it still wasn't enough in the long term to sustain the overhead that had been created at the label.
Well, yeah, there was a lot of public discord, not to invoke another name, but lots of public stuff going on. Unpaid royalties, high profile breaches of contract. It was 9 years ago this month that Lookout officially wrapped it up.
Yeah, I think it was 2012. I was in France writing a book in the south of France. How fancy is that?
Super fancy.
Yeah, I had moved on. But no, I was heartbroken when I heard that Lookout had finally closed the doors for good, but they were on life support for a while. And I think, you mentioned Discord. I mean, I think Discord to this day is Ian MacKaye. I mean, doing everything. Like, it's been a solo operation, or at least a small operation for a long time. Whereas Lookout grew. They had a big staff. They had their own building. They opened a record store. They were, there was offices. There was a lot of expenses. There was a lot of showcases. People were flying all over the place. And I think that overhead just grew and grew and grew to the point where there was problems paying the bills.
Let's talk about another label. It was a couple years after Lookout started that Fat Records launched.
Yeah.
Was it kind of like the Sharks and the Jets, Batman versus Superman? Were the two camps pitted against each other?
They weren't pitted against each other, but it was like Lookout was first, and then down in LA there was Epitaph, and Epitaph was kind of a great label. I mean, awesome bands, hit it big early with The Offspring, but they were, I always thought, kind of more, and some of the guys on the label would disagree with me, because again, like, my all-time favorite Canadian band was an Epitaph band for years, the Weaker Thans. Very respectable, everything, but it seemed like more of a kind of almost like a major label-esque type setup, whereas Lookout just felt full-on community. And that just could be my perspective of looking down the I-5. And then, but they had Rancid, one of the greatest punk rock albums ever, in my opinion, and Out Come the Wolves. And they had No Effects for a while. And of course, Bad Religion, and a lot of great bands. But then I think that Fat Mike was like, why don't there's a bunch of bands that aren't getting signed to Lookout, a bunch of bands that aren't getting signed to Epitaph, and he saw that there was a place for him to fit in there with another Winnipeg band, Propagandy, which became totally huge. In fact, the Smugglers have toured all over the world, and the most common band shirt that I've ever seen in countries all over the world is Propagandy. That's my t-shirt trivia. Their t-shirts are the most widespread of any band I've ever seen, of any punk band, let's say, more than DOA, more than No Means No, definitely of any Canadian punk band, like absolutely number one. But so yeah, there was a kind of like, oh well, who do who's what Chicks Dig It didn't make it. Good friends of mine as well, but Chicks Dig It didn't make it on to Lookout. Larry didn't like the name, but Fat Records is no problem. Chicks Dig It went over to Fat. Another Canadian, they did well with Canadian bands, Fat Records. Another Canadian band they brought on was the Kilted Real Mackenzies, the Scottish punk band, and did well by them for years and years. So it was, it felt a little different, maybe a little less Ramonesy. If the Ramones were kind of like the blueprint for Lookout, maybe No Effects was the blueprint for Fat. I'm not sure, because it did seem to be like a lot of those the types of bands ended up with Fat. But really, Fat's still going. I mean, they've always been able to keep it going, and I have nothing but respect for that. I'm choked that Lookout isn't around any longer.
And just a quick reminder, this Sunday kicks off the series. It's Lookout Zoomout with Grant Lawrence hosting. It is look at that, an online Lookout Records reunion show series. The first episode features members of the Mr. T Experience, Pansy Division, the Queers, Cub, the Crumbs, and of course the Smugglers. I love the you're holding up the Lookout Zoomout gig poster,
a beautiful cardstock poster that was designed by the aforementioned Chris Applegren. And so that's his amazing penmanship. And we are actually giving these beautiful posters. We're going to sell them too. I don't know. I have to figure out the postage to go all over the place, because there's people from all over the world that are going to this thing, which is one of the silver linings of doing a thing online. But so we're going to give these away to people that wear their old Lookout Records band shirts to the Zoomout. And the other thing, people keep asking me, they're like, well, is it like a podcast? Like, are you guys all doing like a roundtable discussion? But that's not what it is. It's more like it's like a rock and roll review. I'm introducing each one of these artists, and then they're performing live. They are playing
that's awesome.
Their songs live.
I wasn't clear on. I thought it was just kind of like this retrospective talking about the old days. That's even better.
Yeah, no, they're playing their music live. We have to somehow make that a little clearer in the future.
Oh, that's awesome.
So we're going from like one artist to the next. It's built around in the 1950s. What's the guy who coined the phrase? Alan Freed.
Alan Freed, right?
Yeah, he would
eventually left the business in disgrace, but
yes, for payola scandal. And I'll probably do the same at some point. But I'll let myself out. But yeah, Alan Freed did. I loved that he always did these rock and roll touring shows where he would take a bill like this, except it was like Little Richard, Buddy Holly, Chuck Berry, Fats Domino, and one other band,
like Bo Diddley.
Yeah, and they would each play 3 songs, and they would play the hit that was just like locked in, like their biggest hit, and then they would play the B-side maybe, and then the third song would be either their next single or maybe a cover that even more people would recognize. And so that's what this is based on, that each of these artists are going to do short sets where they're going to play like their biggest Lookout hits. That's the whole point of it. And so it's just basically a chance for, this has been a very, 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 as everyone knows, an incredibly difficult year, especially in your country, both health-wise, politics, everything has been a gong show.
Wait, and politics? What's
yeah. You've been in a coma. But it's, the whole point of this is like me as a neutral Canadian. I discussed this idea with Chris Applegren, and it was just about like, let's bring people together. Let's just have it. Let's like it's just about nostalgia. Like, let's not make any bones about it. Let's just bring people together. Let's just hear these songs. Let's see them and hear them perform live in an intimate space, because weirdly, Zoom can be quite intimate and can be a weirdly emotional online medium. And so they'll be, like you and I are talking right now, it'll be Dr. Frank in one of these little boxes, but he'll be performing his most well-known Lookout songs, and then he'll be surrounded by however many hundreds of Lookout fans from around the world, all in their little boxes watching.
I love it. I love it. That's going to be so much fun.
Yeah, we are looking forward to it. It's a bit of a gong show organizing the whole thing, but it's also been a pleasure reconnecting. Everyone's just said yes. We already have the full lineup booked for the second Lookout Zoomout, which is they're the last Sunday of every month. And we'll see, like my brain kind of thinks in threes. So we're thinking like we'll go with 3 and we'll see after that, because after that, it's going to be April and it's going to start getting warmer. And I think maybe people want to be on Zoom a little less, and maybe we'll start all getting vaccinated. Your country's way ahead with the vaccinations than Canada is.
Dude, I'm looking at how I'm feeling like I'm going to be vaccinated around Halloween. Like I'm not going anywhere based on the way things are going. I'm sitting right here in front of this mic for a while.
You and I are the same age. I'm looking at September, but it'll probably be pushed back to July, actually.
And by
my
the
age
same
group
age,
is July.
By the same age, you mean we're 35.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, we're at the end of the line.
Going back to some of the bands we're talking about, some Lookout history. You mentioned Pansy Division.
Yeah.
Openly gay punk band.
Yes, the first.
Revolutionary. I give Green Day credit. When they left Lookout, when they put out that first record on Reprise, when they put out Dookie, they took Pansy Division out on tour with them.
Yes. Like for the Dookie tour. Pansy Division played Madison Square Garden, and here's a great picture of there's Billy Joe and there's John Giannoli, and that's backstage. I can't remember where that is, but there's another shot of Pansy Division with the guys from Green Day. This is from John Giannoli's amazing book, Deflowered, My Life in Pansy Division. And the incredible thing about Pansy Division, I give them a ton of credit because they broke down a lot of barriers in punk and in music in general. They were the first fully out punk rock band in history, in the world. They did it. And they, on that Green Day tour, they faced abuse from the mainstream fans that did not understand. Pure homophobia that we would not expect now outside of a Duck Dynasty cast reunion.
For real.
Like this, I can't believe, like some of the stories in this book, I'm like, I cannot believe that they were treated like that, bottled at some of these arenas just for singing these outrageously forward and amazing songs. But they persevered and they did it. And I have nothing but respect for them. And they're still together. In fact, this year is their 30th anniversary as a band. Pansy Division formed in 1991, and they have played 1,000 shows in something like 18 countries around the world. So it'll be a thrill to hear some of those stories and hear some of those songs from John Giannoli at the Zoomout as well.
I'm glad you mentioned the biography. I have not read that yet. I'm always looking for good rock books. Well,
hey, I don't know if you have this one, James. This is by some guy named Grant Lawrence. It's called Dirty Windshields, the best and the worst of the Smugglers Tour Diaries. So one of the reasons that I have a good memory is because I kept a diary the entire time. And so I kept tour diaries everywhere. So I know exactly what happened at any given show on any given night, because that night in the van or at the hotel, I scribbled down the craziness that happened at 7th Street Entry in Minneapolis in the summer of 1994 or whatever.
I love it.
Yeah, so that's what that book is all about.
I love tour diary stuff, and we will read that. I remember the first time I read Our Band Could Be Your Life. I'm like,
Yeah.
I want every book I read to be just like that.
Yeah, that's an amazing one, and that was a huge influence on me. And it's about 3 feet over there.
It's so good. So going back to your band, going back to the Smugglers,
Yeah,
you mentioned 1996. Was Selling the Sizzle like the big moment? Was that
that was our high water mark. Yeah, I mean, it was the first record on Lookout, and I remember like the Smugglers. This is what happened. We went from before Lookout. We would always tour the States. We loved touring the States as a Canadian band. It was very exotic and glamorous for us as Canadians. We would grow up watching American culture. And so, any city we went into, our reference point would be the TV show that happened in and around that town. Like if we went through Phoenix, it was like, oh, there was that show, that sitcom Alice, that with the diner, Mel and all that, and the waitresses, and that was our reference point for Phoenix, and Dallas, of course, the show and all this stuff. And over and over and over, that would be because we were raised on television in the 70s and 80s and into the 90s, and that was it. So that was really thrilling for us. But our shows, as I talk about in Dirty Windshields, it would be like in the States, it would be like, a couple of good shows here. Maybe we'd luck out and get on a good bill in Los Angeles and San Diego. But then like the next night in Phoenix, we'd be playing like the night after Anal Mucus packed the place, and it'd be on a Monday, and we'd be on open mic night. It would be like open mic night and Smugglers, like the sort of Spinal Tap moments. And I remember one time in Chicago, actually, we loved playing this amazing place. I think it was on Lincoln Avenue called Lounge Acts.
Oh yeah.
Run by Sue Miller, an old friend of ours, and who I think might have been married to
Jeff Tweedy
from Wilco, yeah, back when he was in Uncle Tupelo. And so we would go and play this amazing bar. And I remember we were so excited because Sue had booked us to play with the Reverend Horton Heat at Lounge Acts. Smugglers are going to be opening. We're like, it's going to be packed. It's going to be so amazing. And we got there and seemed a little quiet outside of Lounge Acts that night. And we got there a little late, and there was a sign on the door, and it said, Reverend Horton Heat canceled due to illness. And then there was a handwritten brackets, Smugglers still playing. And our spirits just sank, like, because we weren't that well known in Chicago yet, and we became well known thanks to Lookout, but not then. We were on Pop Llama, and it just wasn't. So we played, because Reverend Horton Heat didn't play, we played to pretty much an empty room. But the one lesson I've learned in rock and roll is you never know who is in the room. So the people that were in the room were these incredibly influential, amazing people. One of the greatest rock and roll photographers in the United States was there, Marty Perez.
Oh yeah.
Who took a bunch of great photos of us. Jeff Tweedy was at the bar because he was married to the owner. The guys from the Cocktails were there. I don't know if you remember them.
I used to love the Cocktails.
Yeah, this crazy jazz weirdness. We ended up staying with them that night. And there was another, the guy who, there was one, I know his name, Blackie from Urge Overkill.
Blackie Onassis.
Yes. So I'm like, this place is empty, but the 5 people who are here are like indie rock royalty. And we, of those friendships, we remain friends with Marty Perez, and we remain friends with Mark from the Cocktails and Sue, not so much with Blackie or Jeff Tweedy, but it was still fun to play for them. So you never knew. But then, so we went from those sorts of situations, and most of those connections were through our friends in the Young Fresh Fellows, who would do great shows at Lounge Acts. But but so those are the Young Fresh Fellows, Pop Lama connections. Then we switched over to Lookout, and we went to a much younger, all ages
Yeah.
scene that was more in our kind of, because we were barely legal to get into these places that like lounge acts. So we went to the all ages scene, and it literally went from, you know, nights like in Phoenix and in Chicago to just getting onto package tours, you know, like this, where it was 2 or 3 Lookout bands, and every single show from coast to coast was sold out and packed. And we were just in, it was like a light switch. And our career just went from middling to just boom. And, you know, at the end of a show, we were used to selling 1, 2, 3, couple of CDs a night, maybe a couple of LPs, maybe a couple of T-shirts if they really pitied us. And all of a sudden, our merchandise was flying. Like, we couldn't believe it. I remember we were in like playing in Philadelphia with the Mr. T Experience or the Queers or something like that. And I remember clearly our merchandise guy, Ska T, the Canadian king of ska, he would come with us and sell merchandise for us. He came up and said, "We sold $1,000 in T-shirts tonight." And I just got him to repeat it over and over. So the rusty cogs in my drunken brain could understand what he was saying to me. We broke $1,000 in T-shirt sales. Usually he would hand me a couple of crumpled $5 bills, said, "I think we sold maybe 2 T-shirts." And he was often lying just to pump my tires. You know, it was maybe 1 shirt. And that was what it was like. If it had that Lookout logo, these CDs and the LPs and the T-shirts would just fly. And the T-shirts would sell if you put the Lookout logo with the eyes on the back of it. I mean, I remember being at the Trocadero in Philadelphia, where you could go up into the balcony and there would be 1,000 kids on the floor rocking out to the Mr. T Experience or whatever. And it would just be white T-shirts with the Lookout logo on all the T-shirts. And I would be thinking, like, we are in a happening and it's freaking me out. This is it. Like, we're in this moment and we just got to ride this wave.
Yeah.
And we did. We you know, that Lookout, our connection with Lookout took us right around the world.
That's amazing. I do want to correct myself. I hate giving wrong information. I'm sure you'll appreciate this as a broadcaster. The cocktails were Archer Pruitt, Mark Greenberg, John Upchurch, and Barry Phipps. I said Sam Prekop. He was in Shrimp Boat and the Sea and Cake. It's going to
wait. Say the members again.
The cocktails. It was Archer Pruitt, Mark Greenberg, John Upchurch, and Barry Phipps.
I didn't hear a Mark, and I was worried because I was certain that the main dude, or at least one of them, our friend in the band, was Mark. So that's good.
It's been 30 or so years, so
it has been.
the memory definitely gets fuzzy over time.
Yeah, they lived in some crazy warehouse under your train tracks.
Yeah, which could be anywhere in the city, really.
The L line, or whatever you call it. They lived under that in a warehouse, and it was, I mean, basically 2 of us had to sleep in the van. It was so sketchy.
You mentioned something about how you didn't play to a big audience at Lounge Acts. You played to a handful of people. I think you learned a punk rock lesson, and I think it's a lesson that still applies today, especially in the world of digital content. Everyone in the audience has an audience. Like, this idea that you have to be this mass appeal, whatever, you have to, play for hundreds of thousands of people. You have to put out an album that sells 500,000 copies. It's all bullshit. You just have to find that small group of people who are super excited about you, and they'll propel you. Yeah.
I mean, the Smugglers were completely, when we got to the level where we were basically selling out 300-person clubs in North America, Europe, Japan, that was perfect for us. Like, we loved, I call it rock and roll compression. If you go, like, for us as the Smugglers, we were a rock and roll band. We were built on the blueprint of the early Rolling Stones, a lead singer, 2 guitars, bass, and drums. And we liked to get on a stage and explode in energy. We like to look like accountants and act like Gigi Allen might be a bit of an extreme example, but you know, it's like we wanted to be airborne the entire time. We wanted that like weird juxtaposition of guys who wore suits and had short hair and then just like exploded. And for us to have maximum impact on an audience, we preferred a stage that was about, you know, a foot or two high, and we liked low ceilings because we call it rock and roll compression because say you light off a stick of dynamite in, you know, the room that you're sitting in, everything in that room is going to be just destroyed and knocked over and smashed. If you light off a stick of dynamite in the middle of a football field, it's going to sound like pop. You know, it's not going to be there. And I've heard comedians discuss this too. And you know, if the Smugglers walked into like a huge theater or whatever, I remember we played Nashville Pussy a couple times, and they're playing big theaters, and we'd go, this is just like, it's too big. Like it's very challenging to reach the people at the back that, you know, it just didn't have the rock and roll compression. But if you go into a place like Lounge Acts, it's like, okay, this is perfect. You know, this is a nice long dark bar, pretty low ceiling, nice stage, and that is where you could get that rock and roll compression where it would just hit the walls and it sounded warm, and you could really grab people in that visceral way that great live rock and roll does.
Agreed. The bigger the venue, the easier it is for people to disengage.
Yeah. And, you know, some like obviously Paul McCartney, you know, has got to do it, but there's a reason why the Rolling Stones will warm up in a small club like the Horseshoe Tavern in Toronto, or REM used to start their tours at a small club called Richards on Richards in Vancouver. The reason they did that was to test their sets to that compressed audience, you know, to see what was working. And that's where they would feel comfortable because that's where they started.
God, those Stones moments, they played the Double Door here in Chicago
in
the 90s as a warm up before they played Soldier Field, the big football stadium. I don't know if you have one of these shows, but I have a show that if I could go back in time and attend, this would be number one on my list. It's the night the Rolling Stones walked in on the Muddy Waters Band at the Checkerboard Lounge on the south side of Chicago. And there's video documentation of this. That to me is that one show I'd go back.
Is this like 1965 or something like that?
No, this was, I want to say, either right before the Some Girls tour or the Tattoo You tour. Maybe the Tattoo You
so
tour.
1980 roughly. Yeah. Wow.
That's like fantasy stuff.
That's Stones in their prime. I mean, these days it's bands like the E Street Band and the Arcade Fire who are doing that kind of thing. You know, like the Arcade Fire will announce, you know, about an hour beforehand that they're playing in some small club, and they're one of the best bands in the world, and they play, you know, arenas now. And so, but they love the club atmosphere as well. So, you know, I mean, but you know, luckily the Smugglers, in my opinion, never got past the 300 person. I mean, when we toured with bigger bands, we got into it, but I swear to God, we enjoyed the 300 person club more than anything else.
I totally get it. So where do things stand with the Smugglers circa 2021?
Well, when this book came out, this book came out in 2017, and it was a long time coming. And the Smugglers had wrapped up very unceremoniously in the early 2000s, like around 2004, 2005, for our last Lookout record. And that's when things were really coming apart. And there was very little done for that record at all. And it just wasn't, nothing was clicking. So the Smugglers got put on blocks, as we say in Canada. And there was a long break. There was like a 13-year break, but I finally got this together. And I didn't really think that the Smugglers would play live. But then this really nice kid named Alex Botkin wrote me an email and said, hey, next year, I guess it would be 2017, is the 30th anniversary of Gilman Street. And Smugglers play Gilman Street a bunch. It's basically the epicenter of the Lookout Records scene. And he said, we're doing a 30-year anniversary concert for Gilman, and we want to do a Lookout Records weekend. And the Mr. T Experience is in, and Pansy Division's in, and Squirt Gun is in, and he listed off a few other bands. Would the Smugglers consider doing it? And we had turned down a lot. We had turned down a tour to Norway. We had turned down various shows here and there because I just knew I didn't think it was going to happen. But I'm like, Lookout, that community, those bands. So I sent an email off to all four of the other guys. And one by one, it was yes, yes, yes. And then the stickiest guy in the band is Dave Carswell, who is the only full-time musician. He plays with Destroyer to this day. And would be the guy to say no. And then just, he said yes. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh my God, we're playing Gilman. We're playing the 30th anniversary of Gilman. And it was the first time the Smugglers had played in 13 years. And that gig sold out 700 people in like a day or less, couple hours. And people flew in from all over the world for that show. It was unbelievable. There was a point in the show where I just we bring the song down a bit and I started saying, where are you from? Where are you from? Where are you from? And in the pit, it was like Florida, Australia, Italy, Japan, New York, Los Angeles. It was like mind-blowing, but it spoke, it all came back to that community and that family feeling. And it was recreated for that rainy weekend in January in 2017. That Gilman provided me an ending to this book. It ended really badly, but that actually gave me a happy ending. And then it's that type of spirit and camaraderie that basically spurred, doing this, because we've had such a rough time the last year or so. It just gives reason for people to get together and have fun and enjoy the music again.
Can you hold the poster up one more time?
Yeah.
So basically all these Lookout bands, they're going to gather around the Apple II computer.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Oh, there. I'm trying to get movement so I can see my screen, make sure I'm holding it up properly.
So this is happening again, Sunday afternoon, 2 p.m. Central Time, noon, where Grant is. It's a variety show. It's nostalgia. It's going to be super fun.
And I'm the ringmaster.
You are, and this is the first of a series. Well, you're clearly the most appropriate person to do it. I mean,
and we're charging tickets. It's pay what you can, but the minimum is $10 because that's basically like a $1 bill these days. So $10 is the minimum, because hopefully most people can afford $10. If you can't, write me, I'll send you a ticket. But then it's pay what you can. So some people, because all the money is going to the musicians, some people are paying $20. Some people are being crazy generous. We don't care about that. If you can pay $10, you get in, you can win a poster, you can ask a question to one of the musicians, you can be in this weird, intimate Zoom environment where you can see everybody from all over the world, and there's going to be a chat going and all that. So we're really looking forward to it. Hopefully the internet survives. But I mean, I figure if Zoom can survive like Christmas Day and New Year's Day, it can survive anything.
Oh, I'm looking forward to it. And again, this is the first of a series.
Yeah. Last Sunday of every month for at least the next 3 months.
I should, before I cut you loose, Grant, and you've been very generous with your time, I just want to read a couple comments we've had as this has been going on.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Will says, the story about the Gilman Street reunion is amazing. It really illustrates how that scene was transformative for so many people. I mean, you talk about an impact that's just...
Yeah, I mean, that's the example of like, you document your local scene, which is very, very important. You start local, Mint Records in Vancouver, Sonic Onion Records in your favorite Canadian city of Hamilton. That is what they did, and then it grows. And one of those bands often reaches a stratospheric level. Not every time, but a lot of the time it does. And then you bring a whole new type of music to the world. The Ramones in New York City, for instance, changed music, definitely punk rock. And so that is very important, and that was on display at that Gilman weekend. It was a microscopic local scene in a concrete warehouse that went global, and it was incredible to see that global pilgrimage return for that weekend 4 years ago now.
No doubt. Bob says, great interview. Loving these stories. Natalie says, one of my favorite interviews so far. Grant is a fantastic guest. These stories are great.
Oh, that's so nice, Natalie. Where's Natalie from? In Chicago?
In Chicago.
Right on. Well, that's very nice. I appreciate all those kind comments. I got a million of them. Stories, not compliments.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say, people love me. They can't stop complimenting me.
No, I meant stories.
Maddie says Smugglers shows were so much fun.
Yes, Fireside Bowl. That's where, like, once the Smugglers actually became on Lookout and became popular, we would come to Chicago and we'd play our own shows at the Fireside Bowl. And they were really fantastic dance parties in this crazy bowling alley turned rock and roll venue. And then we would tour with a couple of the bigger bands. Like we did some really epic shows at the Metro, and I remember with the Donnas. That was over the top, craziness.
Your memory is very strong.
Yeah, I can even remember the date of that one. It was in the middle of spring break in March of 2000, and there were kids just going crazy, like jumping off the balcony. And the Donnas at that time were kind of at a peak, and they just attracted all sorts of unbelievable fans. I'll just tell you one quick Donna's story.
Please.
Now I'm like stretching you out, but I remember like a couple of people would bring. It was just something about the four women being in a band. It was like they were like female baby Jesuses. People would come bearing gifts for them. Like, here, take this. And there was one crazy story where this guy shows up in Austin. I don't know if you remember the Brady Bunch episode where Bobby wins like a lifetime supply of chewing gum, and the truck backs up into the driveway. Well, in Austin, Texas, this kid shows up in the backstage at Emo's, and there's a tiny, decrepit backstage. And he says, "Hey, I'm a big fan of Donna's. Hey, Smugglers." And he goes, "I won a contest I entered a contest to have a walk-on, like an extra on the TV show Buffy the Vampire Slayer." But he didn't win the contest. He won second place, and second place was a lifetime supply of Mike and Ike's jelly beans. And he said, I know, like, so he said, and I want to give you some. And he literally backed up this cargo van to the back doors of Emo's and opened them up, like this. And there was just wall-to-wall cartons of Mike and Ike's. And they started loading them from their van, their parents' van, into, I think his dad had a carpet cleaning business or something. And they were stuffed into our van and into the Donna's van. Mike and Ike's, thousands upon thousands of Mike and Ike's. And for the rest of the tour, we would pelt them from the stage into the crowd, and almost every show, including the Metro in Chicago, turned into these bizarre, sticky Mike and Ike's fight, where these ridiculous, sticky, disgusting jelly beans would be flying through the air like confetti that hurt. And and eventually the Donners are like, enough with the Mike and Ike's. And but I swear, by the end of that tour, which was something like 40 shows, there was still Mike and Ike's in the back of our vans. We hated those things by the end of that tour. Oh, they were disgusting.
So if the Donnas are getting a truckload of Mike and Ike's, imagine what someone like McCartney gets when he rolls into town. I
mean, I remember another one in Oklahoma City. This guy shows up. He's kind of looking a little strange, like kind of looked like the big guy in Of Mice and Men who didn't talk so much.
Lenny?
And kind of hanging around. And that's the thing, is like people would always hang around to talk to the Donnas at the end of the night. And this guy had just gotten out of the state penitentiary in Oklahoma, and he was so happy because he was able to literally go from the state pen to the Donna show. And he was even happier because he had a curfew, but the Donna show was all ages, so he could get home before the curfew and still see them. And what he did, this again sounds like a cliche, but you hear in prisons you make license plates.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in the Oklahoma State Penitentiary, you really do make license plates. And he made 4 personalized license plates for each Donna from the license plate factory in the Oklahoma State Penitentiary, and gave each one to the 4 Donnas. And we're, the smugglers, we kind of felt like Forrest Gump at that point. We're just like, he's always on the periphery of these incredible scenes. We were just like, what the hell? This is amazing. So we saw a lot of that on the Donna's tour.
That's amazing. All right. You are Grant Lawrence. You on Sunday are hosting the first ever Lookout Zoomout. It's a retrospective. It's nostalgia. It is exactly the antidote to everything we've been dealing with for the past year. This is just a fantastic escape with music we love, musicians we love. That's happening Sunday. $10.
Yes.
Pay what you can.
And it's through a online concert company called sidedooraccess.com. sidedooraccess.com, and the event is Lookout Zoomout. And I think it's right on the front page of sidedooraccess.com.
I love it. Well, before I cut you loose, I want to thank everyone who's watched this live. Much appreciated. Thanks for joining us for that. And we're going to wrap up this whole